Good afternoon. I'm Andrea Brennan, Director of Housing Policy and Development for the Community Planning and Economic Development Department. I'm also the Interim Director of the Community Planning and Economic Development Department. Mark Ruff, our City Coordinator, is currently in the City Council Budget Committee meeting right now. That committee is meeting to discuss the amended 2020 budget. We have a number of staff updates for you today. We have updates on the city and the county's homelessness response and encampment response. We have updates on recovery work, updates on the city's complaint-based education forward approach to compliance of COVID protocols. And then if our Health Commissioner, Gretchen Musicant, can join us from the Budget Committee meeting, we'll also have an update on the latest health inspections in bars and the latest COVID statistics for Minneapolis. So I will start with the update on the city's homelessness response. The city and the county have been partnering on homeless response since the start of the pandemic, helping to get vulnerable persons out of shelters and into hotels, ensuring that shelters could remain open for 24 hours, and providing hygiene support through the city health department to those experiencing unsheltered homelessness. Despite all of these efforts and work by the county to bring on more shelter capacity than we've ever had before, we know that we are experiencing unprecedented levels of unsheltered homelessness. The city and county are working to further expand our response through directly funding shelter expansion, street outreach services, and other services to support persons experiencing homelessness. The city has received a one-time influx of funding from the federal government through the CARES Act to provide help with responding to homelessness during the pandemic. This historically large one-time Emergency Solutions Grant, or ESG as we call it, funding provides an opportunity to strategically respond to COVID-19 across a range of strategies and to reshape the city-county homelessness response system to better serve persons experiencing homelessness in the coming months and years. On July 10th, 2020, the city and the county issued a joint request for proposals, RFP, to solicit community proposals for emergency shelter, street outreach, rapid rehousing, and homelessness prevention, or shelter diversion. Proposals are due this Friday. We hope to fund proposals that can meet one of four objectives. One, to quickly and permanently rehouse households experiencing homelessness who are currently residing in non-congregate shelters, such as hotels, motels that were set up by Hennepin County to respond to COVID-19. Two, enhance the safety and quality of the community's emergency services by ensuring adequate space to social distance and provide necessary isolation and quarantine spaces for households in shelters and staying in unsheltered locations. Three, meet the goals described in Hennepin County's shelter revisioning plan, including adding shelter that is culturally relevant to single adults disproportionately represented in the homeless response system. And four, divert single adults from the community's shelter system by providing homelessness prevention services and assistance, or shelter diversion. We expect to make awards of up to $9 million from this RFP process. Outside of the RFP process, the city's Policy and Government Oversight Committee of the City Council tomorrow will consider a funding package of approximately $8 million to expand shelter in three separate projects, including a new women-specific standalone year-round shelter. This project is a partnership between the city and the county and a nonprofit service provider. Two, a new medical respite shelter to serve medically frail persons experiencing homelessness. This project is part of a partnership with Catholic Charities to also add 167 units of permanent supportive housing to serve persons who are experiencing or at risk of experiencing homelessness. This project is funded by the city, the county, and the state through Minnesota Housing. And then third, a new emergency shelter culturally designed to serve Native American persons experiencing homelessness. This project is in partnership with American Indian Community Development Corporation and funded by the city, county, and state. All three projects are a response to the significant increase in unsheltered homelessness that has occurred locally since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic and subsequent economic turbulence we've experienced. The city-county response to homelessness during COVID-19 prioritizes moving people from unsheltered homelessness to safer shelter and housing situations. We strongly believe that encampments, especially large encampments, pose serious health and safety risks, and that we should be undertaking strategies to reduce the size and manage the growth of encampments. At existing encampments, we are committed to working with our contracted outreach providers to identify who is staying there and help them connect to services and safer housing and shelter options. We are currently working to finalize an outreach contract to provide additional $200,000 to support individualized approaches to serving persons experiencing unsheltered homelessness with a focus on placement into permanent housing. Housing solves homelessness. In addition to all of these efforts to improve the homeless response system, we are continuing our efforts to bring more permanent housing options online for people experiencing homelessness. There will be 110 new housing units coming online between now and February 21 that they are specifically designated for persons experiencing homelessness. And during the rest of 2020, we expect to close on the financing for city funding for another 290 units. That's 290 units that would, again, specifically be designated for persons experiencing homelessness. And these new permanent housing options are provided through partnerships with the city, the county, the state, and in some cases, the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority in all contributing funding. We are also preparing for the end of the evictions moratorium. Tomorrow, the city's Policy and Government Oversight Committee will also consider $1.2 million in funding to support free legal services to low-income Minneapolis renters facing eviction or living in housing with habitability issues. Resources are available to assist low-income Minneapolis residents to pay the rent and mortgage. The city is providing $3 million for emergency rental housing assistance. The application period for these funds is closed, but residents can still apply for county funds. The county has made $15 million of its federal CARES Act funds available for emergency housing assistance, both rent and mortgage. Information can be found at hennepin.us/rent-help. Again, hennepin.us/rent-help. And this link is also on the city's coronavirus housing website. The state is also making another $100 million available for housing assistance. We expect to have information available on or around the 1st of August, and we'll link that information on our website as well about how to access those state funds. When we get to the questions part of this, I'd also like to acknowledge that David Hewitt, the Minneapolis Hennepin County Office to End Homelessness Director, is also here to respond to questions. So with that, I will turn it over now to Erik Hansen, who will talk about recovery work updates. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Erik Hansen. I'm the city's Director of Economic Policy and Development. It's ERIK, HANSEN. I have a few updates in 3 areas about the recovery. First, we'll start with unemployment and employment and training. At this moment, as we've reported in the past, there are more than 100,000 people in Minneapolis receiving unemployment benefits. Many of these people are younger. They're Black, Indigenous, people of color, or people with limited educational credentials. This is a big deal coming up this week, as widely reported. The federal top-off of $600 of benefits per week from the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program will end. And without federal extension, this program we expect to see in the region dramatic economic drop-off, and families in our city will endure more hardships due to the pandemic. For those laid off or looking for support to find new jobs, the state's career force system is available for job seekers. You can find more information and pre-screening by talking to the two career force centers in the city. On the north side, that phone number is 612-299-7200. And on the south side, that number is 651-539-4410. Again, north side, 612-299-7200, and south side, 651-539-4410. While we are monitoring people on unemployment, we are also supporting our young people in the community with the Step Up program. The Step Up program has been running for a number of years in Minneapolis to provide youth internships and career services for young people through summer internships. We typically do about 1,500. This year, due to the pandemic, we were able to find virtual or in-person internships for about 500. Those are people making somewhere between $11.30 an hour to $13.25 an hour. We had about 3,000 people apply for the program this summer, and for those who did not get an internship, we have paid training, online training for those, and we've had about 1,000 young people take us up on that offer. It's a 5-week program where young people can make up to $600 in stipends for participating in that full training program. Damage assessments continue. Our assessor's office is in the process of reassessing properties that were damaged. We have over 700 buildings that were damaged in the events after the murder of George Floyd, and numbers will continue to come out. We work with our intergovernmental relations staff to convey these numbers to the state legislature as they consider resources for the city to recover. In business support updates, the state is in the process of requesting a disaster declaration from the United States Small Business Administration. With an SBA disaster declaration, it will open up programs for businesses that were damaged physically or had economic injury due to the unrest after the murder of George Floyd, and for those who, especially for those who are uninsured. We have continued to get a number of questions about insurance. For those who are looking for insurance reports or police reports for insurance claims, you can call 311 or go to the city's open data portal, which is minneapolis.servicenow.com/open city portal. That's minneapolis.service-now.com/open city portal to get that information, or call 311 and they can help you. We've also received reports that businesses are having difficulty with insurance companies. The state's Department of Commerce is a service center. If people are denied or have challenge filing claims, you can contact their Consumer Services Center. That's 651-539-1600, 651-539-1600, or 1-800-657-3602, 1-800-657-3602. We've been receiving reports about graffiti in the city. Some of that graffiti is actually art that has been put up after the murder of George Floyd. Businesses will likely receive automated letters from the city of Minneapolis if people are reporting graffiti on buildings. For those who receive it and the markings on the buildings are not graffiti, rather they're art, we want you to connect with our solid waste and recycling team, who will work out a timeline with you and acknowledge in the process to retain the artwork. And you can reach that department at 612-673-2090. That's 612-673-2090, or email them at graffiti@minneapolismn.gov. Security continues to be a comment that we receive. We want everybody to know that the police department continues to fully operate. For those who need it, do not hesitate to call 911 for service. We understand that people want additional security for businesses. We continue to encourage businesses to protect yourself fully by hiring only licensed security personnel. These are personnel that will carry insurance and have the training to support the businesses. If businesses are looking for specific assessments of their business and would like to reach out to the police for more advice, we are we're recommending you to call directly to the police precinct and talk to the inspector. The numbers for the police precincts are 612-673-5701, and then the last digits 02, 03, 04, and 05 for the different precincts. So that's 612-673-57, and then 01, 02, 03, 04, and 05 for the different precincts, and you can talk with the inspectors there. The City Council has directed the Licensing and Consumer Services team, which you'll hear from their manager, Enrique Velazquez, in a minute, about conditions related to hiring off-duty police officers and allowing for flexibility to hire security to meet their needs. We are working directly with those businesses that are affected to go over the options that they need and to change the conditions on their license. And finally, before I turn it over to Enrique, those who want additional technical assistance and advice from the City of Minneapolis, our small business team, continues to operate the BTAP, or the Business Technical Assistance Program, and you can call the small business team at 612-673-2499, 612-673-2499, or email smallbusiness@minneapolismn.gov, smallbusiness@minneapolismn.com, and they can help you walk through the system. And with that, I will turn it over to Enrique, who can talk about COVID protection.
Good afternoon. I am Enrique Velazquez, ENRIQUE VELAZQUEZ, and I am the Manager of Licenses and Consumer Services within Community Planning and Economic Development. What I want to talk to you today is the city's approach to complaint management, especially in the times of the coronavirus pandemic. The city itself takes a complaint-based, education-forward approach to compliance. As part of our business licensing informational program, we've issued more than 15 newsletters to our licensed businesses around the city so that they're aware of expectations and how they specifically may be impacted as the various stages of reopening effort are underway through the state and through the city. Any complaints received as a byproduct of that are funneled through the Minneapolis 311 system and routed to the appropriate area for handling. Inspectors follow up with each one of these business owners and managers respectively to let them know of the complaint that has been received, to talk through the nature of the complaint, to step through what the COVID-19 preparedness plan looks like for each one of those different businesses in the affected areas, and come up with an amicable approach to solving whatever the issue is with respect to the nature of that complaint. Invariably, we do follow up, whether it's in person or through a virtual inspection. We do follow up after the fact to make sure that the issue has been resolved and that we are able to move forward and ensure that that complaint is no longer a concern for the community members or the business at large. One thing that I would like to advise is that there's a differentiation between business behavior and individual patron behavior. With respect to the workplace, we've received very few complaints about workers or businesses not complying with Emergency Regulation 2020-12, requiring the wearing of face coverings while in indoor spaces of public accommodation. We see significantly more complaints relating to patrons either not wearing face coverings or not respecting the physical distancing requirements as set forward in this emergency regulation or through executive orders from the state of Minnesota. More than 50% of our complaints received are specifically on patron behavior, not necessarily the business itself. Patron behavior and how the business responds to that behavior, which brings up another point with respect to our business community. We've been engaged with our business community throughout this process ever since the emergency order went into effect for the local state of emergency. And our business community has shared with us that there have been challenges with customers adjusting to the emergency requirements for individuals to wear face coverings while in indoor spaces of public accommodation. In this current environment, in light of the state of civil unrest, businesses, especially small businesses, minority-owned businesses, and immigrant-owned businesses, do not feel safe or comfortable in approaching patrons who fail to comply with the emergency regulation requiring a face covering for fear of confrontation. In these instances, what we ask the businesses and the business community at large is to follow the same model that the city of Minneapolis employs, which is education forward. They can do that by posting signage at the entrances of their businesses, alerting patrons of the requirement in case they're not aware. They can make face coverings available either as a courtesy or for purchase in case the individuals forget theirs in their vehicle or at home or just don't have them. They can provide signage throughout their businesses so that there are visible reminders of what 6 feet of physical spacing looks like in the space. There are opportunities to provide directional signage in the aisleways or through the passageways, just so that we can educate patrons on what the overall flow should be in these spaces. Adding signage at the sales counters can provide an additional reminder, just focusing on education all the way along with minimal amount of confrontation. All of these initiatives will help educate patrons as a whole on what is expected behavior in these spaces when transacting business in a very safe and non-threatening manner to both the patron as well as to the business employee or the business community itself. And our 311 data also supports that. Almost 10% of the complaints received were for patrons who felt that they were threatened with the wearing of a mask as opposed to also not wearing a mask, or for those that were not wearing a mask. Now, this guidance doesn't necessarily work in all instances. When we reflect on the restaurants or those where you have on-premise food consumption or beverage consumption, there's that requirement to still wear a mask, but then there's the forgetfulness factor that does come into play of putting that mask back on. And this is a very important component of Emergency Regulation 2020-12 to make sure that we are reticent and continue to enforce that and encourage that behavior of wearing a mask when going to the restrooms, when congregating, especially in restaurants, in bars, nightclubs, and the like, where it's more of a social gathering. People are there for a more extended period of time than just a casual shopping excursion to a convenience store or grocery store. So it's vital that people remain vigilant on that front. And there are a number of different responses from the business community on that front. Unfortunately, my colleague, Gretchen Musicant, the Commissioner of Health for the Minneapolis Department of Health, is not here. She was going to speak on more of the response with respect to bars and nightclubs, in addition to the state of health in Minneapolis with respect to the COVID-19 pandemic. So at this point in time, I will turn the microphone back over to Casper.
We just open up the questions.
Okay.
See if questions available.
All right, we will open things up for questions at this time. Yes, sir.
Maybe one for you, Enrique, while you're still up there, but what are you guys doing in terms of business licenses for places that might have been affected during civil unrest and that sort of thing? I was at a deed event a while ago about insurance, and they were saying we're gonna, I guess, chill out on enforcing licenses and fees for a little while things kind of resolve. Where does that kind of stand in terms of places that have licenses that might
Sure.
sustain some damage?
Sure, thank you for the question. So with emergency, oh, pardon. Yeah, so the question, if I understand it correctly, is how is licensing and the city of Minneapolis handling licensing fees for businesses that were impacted either through closure or through other means, destruction, whatnot, as a result of the state of local emergency for the coronavirus pandemic or the state of civil unrest. And with Emergency Regulation 2020-7, Mayor Fry allowed the licensing to suspend the collection of licensing fees, specifically as they relate to food establishments and liquor. Those are among the most expensive licenses we have within the city that are also paid out on a quarterly basis or semi-annual basis. So we have suspended the collection of those fees. In the interleaving time, we're also evaluating what options we have to either provide some level of a rebate or some level of relief. No guarantees that we will be able to offer that at this point, though it is something that we are considering quite seriously. Yes.
I actually have a question for Andrea and potentially Mr. Hewitt. Going back to the topic of housing and the encampments, I heard from a park board official this year the county may be trying to work to create some near-term housing solutions, but also potentially something of a navigation center similar to the one that was created after the Wall of Forgotten Natives encampment rose up. Is that accurate?
So the question is whether whether the city and the county, did you ask?
Yes.
The city and the county are working with the Minneapolis Parks and Recreation Board on more immediate solutions to people who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness, including the potential for a indoor type sort of, very quickly made online shelter similar to the navigation center that the city created 2 years ago. So that's the question. And the answer, I would say, as it relates to any questions related to the Minneapolis Parks and Recreation Board, obviously they're not here today, so I would encourage you to reach out to them directly. Also want to call out that the Minneapolis Parks and Recreation Board has a lot of information about recent actions they have taken and their response to homelessness in Minneapolis parks and encampments, and that information is available on their website, so that's www.minneapolisparks.org/encampments. The other part of that, I can answer part of the question, however, and that is, I mentioned in my update that the city and the county have issued a joint request for proposals. We expect to award up to $9 million through this RFP process. And the types of activities that you asked about are absolutely eligible activities that organizations, nonprofits, shelter providers, or other community organizations can apply for these funds to support those types of activities. So the types of activities I mentioned that we're hoping to see proposals for would include rapid rehousing, outreach to ensure again that we are providing the support that we need to reach out to everyone who's experiencing unsheltered homelessness and identify the individualized approach that makes the most sense for that individual, as well as activities that relate to any kind of expansion of shelter opportunities, particularly targeted to the folks that are disproportionately represented in the homelessness community, including Black and Indigenous peoples. And I'm just going to look at David Hewitt to see do you have anything to add? Okay.
And you mentioned 3 different sort of shelter options that are going to be going forward the POGO committee tomorrow. to include one for natives, for women, and a medical respite shelter. What is the timeline for these 3 projects?
Sure. The estimated, and again, I'm going to look at David if he wants to jump in and add anything here, because these are all projects that we're working on in partnership with the county. The medical respite shelter, we are hoping that will close on its financing in September and start construction. That construction period is likely a year, so that shelter is probably a year out. The shelter that is women-specific, that one, we are again hoping that construction starts on that in September and that the shelter would be online in February. And then the third one, the one that is more that is in partnership with the AICDC, again, we're hoping that we can move on that very, very quickly. The county, and if you have a question about that, I can ask David to. Actually, David, I'll ask you to come up and talk about the action that the county took in related to funding for the acquisition of the building and the rehabilitation of the building. But the reason why we're asking City Council and the county board to consider action on these 3 shelters outside of the RFP process is because these shelters all respond to what has been identified as gaps in our homeless response system and critical needs. And these shelters all are positioned to move very quickly. So the AICDC shelter, we're hoping, again, will start, as soon as approvals can be put in place, with the hopes of having shelter online yet this year. And David, do you want to just come up briefly and respond to the actions the county has taken?
Thank you, Andrea. So I'm David Hewitt, the Director of the Office to End Homelessness for Hennepin County, which is a long-standing partnership between Hennepin County and the City of Minneapolis. As previously referenced, we're working with the city and the state and the American Indian Community Development Corporation to bring online new culturally specific shelter. Last week, the County Board of Commissioners authorized through committee approval to allocate $3.5 million in CARES funding to AICDC to assist with the purchase and rehabilitation of the site. That will go before the full board this coming Tuesday for final approval. In addition, just on the subject of shelter, I should note that since the outset of the pandemic, we've been operating the largest and most intensive shelter system our community has ever seen, with more than 500 people who are at high risk from COVID-19, aged 60 and above or medically fragile, placed in hotel sites that are fully staffed, supportive, did not exist at the beginning of March, have now been operating for 4 months. In addition, all of the remaining shelter sites have been converted to 24/7 operations and significantly deconcentrated to allow for social distancing. And the success of these measures is seen in, I'm going to touch wood at this point, the low rates of transmission that we've seen amongst people experiencing homelessness, to the extent that we've also brought online 2 sites with almost 100 rooms for isolation purposes, of which only 2 are currently occupied. Recent mass testing at a shelter found 0 positive cases, while another one of our largest shelters just went past a month without a positive case. We do have available shelter rooms in these sites each day. For families, we have a right to shelter commitment, and we actually have about 50 private rooms for families with children available right now, and would urge any families with children who are experiencing homelessness to call the Hennepin County Shelter Team on 612-348-9410 to access those spaces. We do also have beds for single adults, and we have some beds that are going up, certainly this month, every night we've had some unused for both men and women. In the region of 40 to 50 that go unused, with over 1,000 people being served in that single adult system. So I can answer any further questions on homelessness, but also hand back to Andrea.
I have a question for Erik. Back to the topic of rebuilding, could you just explain a little bit more into detail into how the city is calculating the actual damages and the losses? The work that I could assume this is part of what the city assessor's office is doing, but how that process is being done.
The question is, how is the city assessing the damage? Correct? Okay. We're working, this work is coming mainly out of the assessor's department. Department, and so we'll probably need to follow up with Rebecca Malquist in the assessor's office for the details, but they're going through a state legislative process to reassess properties that were damaged, and from there they can make an evaluation of what was lost. Now, we've said this multiple times in these conversations, is we as a city are looking at it from three levels of impact. We have what has happened to the buildings, which is coming through the assessor's process, which should take through the rest of the summer for the assessments of over 700 buildings. What was impacted for the businesses? So inside the business, is inventory loss? Is it is it inventory loss? Is it revenue loss? Is it reputation loss? Is it wages lost? And those will be working through the Commerce Department, because that would be insurance data. And the Commerce Department has requested that information from insurance companies, and we work with the state around that assessment. We are also looking at those that will hopefully take advantage of the SBA program, and in that SBA program, a lot of those folks will be connected or won't have insurance, because businesses, unlike homeowners, aren't required to have insurance. So some business owners won't be insured for the losses that they have. And then the third tier of impact is we're looking at the economic wealth that's been lost in the communities. Because of these events that occurred after George Floyd was killed, people's quality of life has been more expensive. Stores are closed. Access to basic services like pharmacies have been more complicated. We've had more, just transportation has been disrupted. Not only with the pandemic, but just with the unrest. And so we think that the long-term impacts, aside from that quality of life, is insurance rates are going to go up. There's going to be a disruption to the real estate market because of potential speculation, because Minneapolis is still a strong real estate market. And we have our Development Services Director, Steve Poore, can talk about permit values if you're interested, but we're still a strong real estate market. And it's going to exacerbate the displacement pressures we see throughout the communities. And the impact of this pandemic and then the unrest after George Floyd's killing impacted all businesses and all residents in Minneapolis. And that goes from people that are, maybe had to just go in early for the curfews to those that have lost their entire, economic base because their building is burned down and they're not fully insured. So it's gonna take a number of years before we'll know the true impact, but we're piercing the $1 billion mark of those three. So, but it's mostly estimates and not hard numbers, but they'll come with time, and that's what we've stated in these briefings in the past, that this is going to take time to figure out what the true economic impact has been from this. And then the pandemic continues, as you know, and I can't understate the cliff that we're about to drop off next week when the pandemic assistance from the CARES Act expires. If all the people in Minneapolis are getting that $600 a week, over 100,000 people, that's a $60 million impact to economic activity next week. So we expect that the problems from the pandemic are going to continue to ripple through, and it's going to impact housing, it's going to impact stability. So we're not out of the clear yet, but we'll continue to work to find resources for people in the community.
How many businesses have you found that didn't have, small businesses that didn't have insurance, and how is that impacting the actual need for aid?
So we've, in our data collection, we've asked for volunteers. We don't have a database of those who have uninsured, uninsured losses, but as part of the SBA program, we've asked for some companies or firms and businesses to come forward and give us losses, and that's the way we get through the test of the SBA. So we're not sure what that number is, but it's a matter of time, and it's really labor intensive. We have to go kind of business to business, and as you know, businesses aren't just hanging a shingle on the front door. Sometimes you'll have multiple businesses in a single building, and sometimes you have businesses that are virtual. So we're not sure the total impact and who was insured and who wasn't, but it'll come out over time.
Any more questions? 2 more questions?
Yes, Mr. Hansen, or it might be for Andrea, I don't know who else.
Okay.
But you kind of touched on there kind of the issue of potential speculation coming through for areas that were impacted by unrest, and I'm wondering if you guys have any initial thoughts or rough plans in place to anything that the city can do to prevent any kind of displacement there,
right,
or stymie gentrification in any way possible. I know that's been a discussion a little bit on the county board too, but
right,
where are you guys at with that, and what sort of is in the realm of possibility?
all right. So if I understand the question correctly, it's what is the city doing to help prevent displacement? And I can let Director Brennan come up and talk about housing displacement work that's going on. But from the commercial real estate side, the city council and the mayor have been pretty aggressive about identifying that as an issue very early and looking for resources. And we are working with our state delegation at the legislature for tools coming through the Promise Act and some other bills that would help us both with cash resources, but with legislative tools to help secure buildings that might go through speculative sources. And then our council members, Kano and Gordon, are authoring an ordinance that will require all notices of commercial sales to come to the city, so we can monitor what's going on. But a lot of this is working with our community-based organizations, the Lake Street Councils, the West Broadway Coalitions, the LEDCs of the world, to help with that connection. As you know, the city's most effective at delivering its services through those community-based organizations, and we're still working closely with them so we can get the information on the, kind of an early warning system on the ground. But I'll let Andrea talk about that housing.
Thank you. I would just like to add briefly to that. The City Council Budget Committee just approved one of the, well, it wasn't an amendment, I guess. It was a staff direction as part of the budget amendment process that specifically directs staff to continue to look for opportunities to support the acquisition of naturally occurring affordable housing, or NOAA type property. The city does have about $3 million in its current 2020 budget that designated for NOAA preservation type activities. So we are out working with our nonprofit partners, including Land Bank Twin Cities and Local Initiative Support Corporation, to identify those opportunities, as well as community partners, community-based organizations, and we're specifically focusing attention on the areas that were most impacted by unrest. So that work is happening. And did you?
Just one more question.
Okay, one more question. And I just wanted to note too that Commissioner Gretchen Musicant is here, and so if there is a question about health-related items, as the last question, Gretchen, Commissioner Musicant is here to answer.
Well, this might be a bigger one, but as Erik was talking about, there's obviously CARES Act dollars to be running out at the end of this month. Looks like that's likely the case. Already have a massive situation here with unsheltered homelessness, and part of that struggle, of course, is keeping people who are on the brink out of being unsheltered. Broadly speaking, I don't know if this is a question for David or you guys, but like, what are you thinking about could be coming down the pipeline in terms of this crisis being exacerbated, and is there anything at the local level that can be done to ease that pending hardship here? So
the question is, given some of the things that we mentioned in this update about what is coming, such as the $600 sort of additional employment benefit, is ending at the end of the month. The evictions moratorium that right now is scheduled to, it's a statewide moratorium on evictions that's scheduled to lift mid-August unless it's extended by another action by the governor or the legislature. So I think that, number one, I want to emphasize that there are, on the housing side, there are resources available to help people pay rent and mortgage. And there's information on the state's website, which I don't have here, but that the governor just announced that there's 31 credit union lenders that are providing mortgage payment relief and assistance. That information is on the state website. Again, the county is currently taking applications for emergency housing assistance, both for rent and mortgage payments. And that information is, I'm just going to say it one more time because it's so important. There's a lot of funding that the county has made available for that. It's $15 million, and I believe that a very small percentage of that has been allocated so far. And then again, want to emphasize that the state has recently announced and has a request for proposals for providers for up to $100 million of additional housing assistance. So this funding for housing assistance is critically important, and it will become more important when people lose this additional unemployment benefit that they have been receiving. So I think that compiled with, again, the action that we're proposing to the POGO committee tomorrow, the Policy and Government Oversight Committee of the City Council, to provide a contract in the amount of $1.2 million for legal services to help provide free legal representation to low-income Minneapolis renters who may be facing eviction or living in conditions that where there's habitability concerns. So those are some of the, I think, the areas of focus that we are working on, because we agree. I mean, with the evictions moratorium eventually lifting, and it will lift eventually, and the loss of benefits, that there's definitely concern there. And then I will look to David. Did you have anything to add?
Not that's worth kind of coming up there for, I don't think.
Okay.
We're doing some work with housing courts to identify folks early on, make sure they get assistance as well.
Okay, so
yeah, the 15 million is the big one.
David just mentioned that the county's been working with the housing court, and as well as our nonprofit organizations like Legal Aid have been working with housing court on more front-end sort of approaches to make sure that people have better, not just representation, but have a better chance of getting their cases heard, or individually as opposed to en masse. And so the approach that that the housing court is, if there are changes that can be done there, can make a difference, I think, as well. And then Erik, did you want to add anything on the economic front or business front?
Unless there's a clarifying.
Okay,
Thank you.
great.